Hello and welcome to the Quantum Bridge with myself, Casper, my co-host as ever, Gary. All right, mate, how you doing?
I'm good, thank you. Yourself?
Good, good. Yeah, I'm all right, thanks. And I'm even better to know that we've got a returning guest, Stephen, and I had a lot of good feedback. I know you did as well,
Mm.
Gary, on what Stephen spoke to us on the first original podcast that we did together, and really keen to get into the second one. Not least because I know there's a lot of people out there actually waiting for this second one, so I'm really glad we're doing it. So, without further ado, Stephen, welcome. Nice to see you.
Hello there. Nice to be back. Yeah, it's brilliant to be back, actually. Yeah, thank you.
Good.
You're welcome.
Pleasure.
So, I think this time we were going to touch on the art of presence, which you often do talks about. So maybe to start with, maybe you could frame that for the audience on what you mean by that. I mean, sometimes maybe we talk the now moment, living in that space, but yeah, let's have a sort of overview of what that is.
Right. I mean, I talked about it last time. It was a little thing that grew, and then I gave it that title, The Art of Presence. And then I'm picking up more and more people are coming. We've got another one coming, which you're coming to, which is amazing. But presence, you know, every time I try to explain to anyone what it is, it always changes how I explain it. But because what I've started to realize, the longer I've practiced presence, which you said is to try to be as in the moment as possible. So that really means to be out of your mind, because when you're in your mind, you're either thinking about the past or you're thinking about the future. So the mind is brilliant at solving problems, and that's pretty much it. But we've switched into, I don't know how long we've been doing it as a human race, but we started to use the brain to think about emotion or control our emotions, and it's not designed to do that. So most people will feel an emotion, it goes straight into their head. There'll be a dialogue around that emotion. It's either their fault or it's somebody else's fault. It's either in the past or it's in the future. So to be present is really to learn to quieten the mind and experience what is going on as it's actually going on, rather than in your head. And for me, the more I've practiced it, and this is an interesting thing, because when I started, I noticed when I really first started in it, and I noticed for the first time how in my head I was, how much dialogue, how much commenting there was going on all of the time, and how much that then feeds back into the body and creates emotions. So we get anxiety, or if you're constantly living in the past, you get depression because it's not as good as it used to be. Oh God, it was so much better when I was doing this, or I was with this person, or was whatever. So when I first started, it takes a bit of practice to start taking the attention away from the mind. And I'm sure a lot of your listeners have done it. And, meditation's a way, but meditation to me, like we talked about before, great. Morning, people do it in the evenings, but what do you do the rest of the day? So I'm trying to do it all the time. And when I first started, I just noticed how much my mind was going on all the time. And what I'd say now, I don't know, 10, 15 years later, I don't know, whatever it is, I now notice when my mind isn't quiet. And that's what happens. You start to quieten more and more. So now I actually notice when it kicks in, when there's a thought, when there's a thing. So the word I'd use is freedom, because once you start realizing that this thing is not equipped to do what it thinks it's doing, it's there to protect you. It was created. We create these personalities to create, protect us from things. So it's always either someone else's fault or we're to blame, whatever. When you don't rely on that and you don't keep feeding into it and engaging with it, you're free. Honestly, the more I do it, the depth of what I can get into it, you don't have to run them patterns anymore, and it is very freeing, very freeing. So really, I would say we're starting when in the talks, I give real basics. I run through like this thing I call a buffer sheet, which is how to find a little bit of stillness and calm and silence throughout the day, so that when something does come up and you instantly go into the mind, you've got a little bit of buffer room. You've created and cultivated some stillness and quietness and peace within you, that when something comes up, and you're reacting, you've got a moment there to just respond rather than react. Because to do it in the moment takes, it's really hard because things trigger us. We go back into an old pattern. The mind tells us something that, we either have to attack or defend, and we get into these patterns. And, and afterwards you can rectify it and go, so even if you miss the bits where you're reactive, I will say revisit them and go, how would I have liked that to have played out, and notice when you are triggered, when you're not actually coming from this place, as I always say, most of us are coming from here, and that thing's trying to defend itself all the time. If you come from here, you're free. You don't have to defend or attack. You can just go with what is. So that's a general expression of what presence is. But the depth of it it's endless.
Yeah. I thought it was interesting what you said there about that. As you do the work, that the balance in the mind changes from being your natural state, being busy all the time, that actually it switches. So then you're in that quiet space more, and then you notice when it gets busy.
Yeah.
And that sort of reactive state, and then getting triggered. I actually use social media as a tool because it's very triggering, or it can be. It's in essence designed so that you interact with it to trigger you and get you angry. And I used to use it, and I think, well, why am I reacting? And basically that was a tool to help me just chill, and become non-responsive. So I know a lot of people say it's bad or whatever, but I found it as a good tool because it is very noisy.
I mean, honestly, the more you, like I talked about, I think last time, mountaintop attainment and marketplace attainment. You can take anyone onto the top of a mountain, sit them there, look out at the view, and they will find some stillness because there's not the things to trigger them. And that's all very well, which is almost what I call like meditation. You're sitting there, you've created a nice place for yourself. It's quiet, it's silent, it's easier to get, which is always good. Find easier places to do it. But really, we all live in the marketplace, and it's busy, it's noisy. There's lots of people going around making our lives not as pleasant as we may wish. So, I always say anxiety is a good one. And people go, what do you mean it's a good one? Well, like, the reason anxiety is, if someone comes to me and they tell me they've got anxiety and that's predominantly what they're suffering with, I always think that's a good starting point because it lives somewhere. We know where it is. We feel it. It's physical. It can actually, it feels like it's knotting us up. So when you've got something that you can actually identify, because depression is, I'd say, more of an encompassing blanket that covers all of our actions, and it's a harder thing to pinpoint where it's affecting us and what it's doing to us. Whereas anxiety, we instantly know when we've got anxiety because it lives there. So, to start with, you just observe the anxiety. And what do you mean? Well, because if you've got it, you know where it is, you can feel it, you can just sit and feel it. And people don't know you can do that. And you don't have to respond to it or try and fix it or do an action that may alleviate the anxiety, because distraction can, so people will get their phone out or talk more. But if you actually just sit and observe anxiety and feel what it feels like, the more attention you give to it, the more it starts to dissipate. So anxiety, so like being triggered, so going on social media, getting triggered all day, brilliant. It's a lesson. The more you do this thing, it's the more you can notice your own behavior and start to do that. So that's, brilliant. Get triggered, go out in the world, be annoyed, be all these things, because they're the things that show you what's going on internally, let's say.
And then, Stephen, this thing tends to emerge where it's just that distance, isn't it? That thing between being that ailment or that problem or that manifestation of lack or whatever, and realizing that the only reason you're aware of it is because it's not you. So it's the moment that you can step outside of whatever it is, anxiety or anything else, and say, oh, actually, I'm looking at my response, my feeling, my blah, blah, to this anxiety, but I am not identified as being anxiety, depression, blah, 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 blah.
You have it. It's not you, it's just come and hung out with you for a little while, and it's not yours. I mean, I had a teacher who used to say, about pain. It's not yours. It's not your pain. And it took me years to work out, oh, it feels like mine. I'm experiencing it. It is mine, and it's like, no, we carry it. We're carrying it, and we can learn to, and it's our job to release it. I mean, it's amazing. I mean, you just touched upon, and it's interesting, I give the talks, and a lot of people are there, never heard about presence, or they've heard about presence. They may have read Eckhart Tolle, they've got some, or Michael Sanger, or some of these, people who are talking about being in the present moment. But ultimately, I'm trying to encourage them. I'm not teaching you, because I can give you the techniques. You sit, you watch your breath, you try and observe, you do all of these things. But they're just to get you into a moment of being still, and the mind to just quieten enough for you to notice what it was doing before. But I talked about it in the last one, we went big straight away. There's a thing inside of you. You can call it the subtle body, the true self, whatever you want to call it. There's a stillness that exists, which is you. There's a personality and a persona, an ego that's on the outside, and within there is a core, let's say, divine, whatever you want to call it. So if I can get them to touch into that, like you said, you can use this language, you can talk about all these words of what presence is, but once you've felt, and like you say, realize that this projection on the outside is not actually you, there is nothing that needs to be defended, and you feel into this untouched, unbroken, pure essence, that I don't need to tell them anymore, because I felt it for that one moment.
Well, even a glimpse, Stephen, of that boundlessness, and I'm not talking about this in some highly esoteric sense, because I want and I believe that you're a huge help and facilitator for this. I want our message, we touched on this prior to actually coming on for the recording itself, to be heard, and really heard, by those sort of people who believe this is not for them. This is for the sort of people who go and do yoga, or do Tai Chi, or are into meditation, or are vegan, or a whole host of other projections as to the sort of people they think it's for. And actually, it's exactly for the people who don't think it's for them.
Yeah, it's liberating. And if I can get someone, through the words I use, the stories I tell, the examples I give, we do a little thing where I say, like, what could happen in the next moment. And after that, I get everyone to just sit and be aware of what, what's going to happen. If they can feel it for a second, then that's it, because they'll know it, and they'll want more of it. And yes, they'll go back to the mind and they do it, but they've felt it. And for me to try and explain that, I can't until they've experienced it. But once they've experienced it once, if it's 10 seconds, 1 second, I mean, I've had moments, more and more now, but when I first started, I remember having 2 hours in the middle of New York, and I'd been mindful of myself all day. It's like we talked about Gurdjieff, remembering yourself. And I just kept bringing myself back into, I'm here, I'm now. And as the day went on, towards the end of the day, I sat down on this deck chair at the bottom of the High Line, and I'd walked the High Line all day, and I sat there. I think it was 2 hours. I couldn't tell you, because the time just went. There was no thought, and it was chaotic, and it was busy, but I was just there and just experiencing it all. And and I really noticed it then, because I'd never experienced it. And now I think I'm more in that, but I've got used to it, that I'm not thinking so much. Like I said, I'm not enlightened. I'm thinking all the time. Funny enough, most of the thoughts are taken up now of what my next talk is going to be about, or what I might be speaking to you about, which is not a bad thing. But again, it's keeping me out of being present.
But I think I understand what you're saying, but I think that you're not. I think that you are shifting in and out of that, and i.e. that you are now aware of what that happening, and that script playing, or that movie playing, a bit like the movie that happened in front of you, with all the people, all the noise, all that crescendo, all that incoming. In a way, I actually find sometimes that sort of environment does provide a perfect chance for that absolute inner peace, in a way that a massive open vista of mountains and water and whatever may not.
I want to honestly, you say that it's interesting you say that because I found it in busier places because whether it's out of necessity because it is busy, so then I go in and find a stillness. But most of my bigger, larger moments, probably because they were more noticeable because it was in like an
Well, the
airport.
contrast helps, yeah.
Yeah, and or on a train or on a rush hour and you're there, and I can have the most peaceful moment. And yeah, because the contrast maybe. Yeah, because like you say, when you're walking in nature, you're naturally already brought down anyway. The thoughts are less, or you're looking at things, but it is for everyone, and it isn't woo woo. It's definitely not woo woo. It's the most common, like we've heard of one of my favorite bits or pieces I've written was the shortest one, and it's just called "I Made a Cup of Tea for Someone's Soul." And they were, talking, and I was noticed there was a little bit of triggering going on, and then I brought myself back into the moment with nothing to defend, nothing to attack, and I made that cup of tea, and they were still talking. I handed it to them, and it was for their soul, and I had an agreement, a little nod with their soul. Personality doesn't know, but it was. I handed them that cup of tea, and they just went, "Oh, that's an amazing cup of tea. It tastes so nice, that tea." And I was like, "Because it was made with love, and it was for your soul." And so, if you don't think, everyone's above it, there's no above it. We're all.
Well, yeah, I totally resonate with that. And the thing about the love aspect of that, which can be passed over a bit quickly, is that yeah, all of that emerged and blossomed out of love, and that's not some namby-pamby soft that the ultimate force, the true power operating in the universe is unbounded and unfettered love. But it's a very hard pill to swallow if maybe, I don't know, you're a hod carrier or a bricklayer, or your whole world revolves around keeping a level of armor in place. And I do invite, especially if ever they see this sort of thing, the sort of people who have been told and made to be, I don't know, the fear of ridicule around being interested in what they really are and who they really are. These are the people that I'm most interested in reaching. Because with these guys, if they get that, the ripple effect of those people who don't believe this is for them, but actually it's what they already are, right? That to me that would be the bridge, the quantum bridge. That would be the message. So, I mean, even this message coming via and through you, Stephen, just purely because of who you are and how you hold yourself and everything, it has massive, massive power that, the likes of many of these other spiritual gurus, they can't reach these sorts of people that we're, normal people.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. You've segued brilliantly into. We were just mentioning it before. I gave a talk, an art of presence talk. I was invited to talk at this event called Wild Man Yoga. And honestly, I'm going to just be honest. I've written about it, and when I turned up, there was this DJ Brandon Block. I don't know if you're aware of him. He was quite big in the day, and he was. I wanted to see his talk, and I only caught the last 20 minutes. And he's a bit of a geezer, effing and blinding, and they were all listening, and I sat at the back, didn't know what to expect, didn't know who was going to be there. It's a yoga retreat, 20 to 30 men doing qigong, breathwork, yoga, sound baths, hot and cold immersion, sauna. I imagined, as I would, the type of people that usually go to these things are more middle class, well spoken, and I heard the people asking Brandon Block these questions, and they sounded like me. And they were swearing and joining in. They was talking about coke and drinking too much and doing a bit of coke at the weekend and blah blah. And I wasn't being snobby, but I was like, what the? This isn't what I expected. So I sat there, and then in between, we went on a foraging walk, which was amazing. And there's 20 blokes all walking around, and they weren't in yoga gear. They didn't have all the spiritual clothing. They weren't using the spiritual language. They were just blokes, let's just say, and you know what I mean. Predominantly working class. There was a mix there, but predominantly working class from all of the home counties, from inner London, East London, Custom House, Isle of Dogs, Canning Town. Now, I grew up knowing people, and I went to school in Dagenham. These type of language and, let's say, mannerisms and expressions, usually in the pub, like I said, with a pint and a line, not qigong and yoga, right? So I'm, you know, I am judging, let's say I'm just observing, but they were super respectful. We came back from the walk and there was shooting. They had like a shooting range set up with air rifles, and it
Not
was
shooting up.
no, not shooting up. They were shooting air rifles,
Yeah, all right,
but
yeah.
the beer did start to come out and a few things started to be smoked. And I was like, this is going to be a tough gig because now I've got 20
Brilliant.
plus
Yeah.
guys. And so the organizer said, just go and tell them that you're going to start your talk and, you know, see who comes in. So I did. And there was a little bit of banter of like, you know, I see I'm doing a talk on presents and they were like Christmas presents, birthday presents. And I'm like, yeah.
Brilliant. Yeah.
But they came in, they started filing in. I did my talk. And I tell you what, it's probably one of the best ones I've ever done. They were so engaged. By the end, I had the whole tent was full. They were listening, they were engaging, they were asking me questions. There was some pushback from some of the things I was talking about.
Brilliant. Yeah, that's good too.
Yeah, you know, I could tell there's some triggering in some because I'm basically talking about what are we defending when we get into an argument. But yeah, you have to have a bit of the, yeah, true, but what are you defending? Tell me, you know. So it was amazing. And you know, we just touched upon it, but they were builders, landscapers, scaffolders. There was a nurse, there was some other people that I spoke to. There was the youngest one there was, you know, I don't know what he did, but they were doing it. They were there. I honestly was in awe when I looked at all them faces listening to me, and I knew they were engaged. They were listening. You know, I wanted to bow to them because to turn up at that event, one of them turned up on his own, quit drinking, realized his life was going off the rails, and went, I'm going to start doing it. And apparently, they did everything. They were doing everything. They did the qigong, they did the breath work, they did the yoga, they listened to my talk. They then were doing the cold immersion. And then when I finished, I walked off and chatting to the organisers. They were doing a sound healing and gong bath, and they were all there. All these blokes under blankets, laying there for an hour, listening to it, and they were all enjoying it, and they loved it. And so the world, honestly, I left humbled by that because I was like, I left Essex 24 years ago. I never expected to see that, and they were normal blokes.
Yeah, and
You know,
also
and I gave the talk was pretty basic, but go on.
no, I was just going to say the amazing thing about that is you mentioned the 24 years, rightly so, because that's the timeline. But in terms of this change, this transition that I'm seeing in other people, and I just hope to see more and more of this. And it's really encouraging to hear from you that that's what you're experiencing and seeing too. Is this has happened in the last few years, as far
It
as
is,
I'm.
and I spoke to a lot of them individually, and a lot of them may have been exploring some sort of spiritual aspect of things or conspiratorial. You know, it
Yeah,
seems
yeah,
to marry
yeah,
up. And again, COVID again was a catalyst for a lot of them that they weren't working as much, they were drinking more, going out, and their lives just went wrong. Or they went out and started doing more things in nature because they had a bit of time because it was lockdown. I mean, I wasn't here during the lockdowns, but a lot of people tell me it was quite nice if you could get out.
yeah,
And
yeah,
they were.
yeah,
I've heard both. Some found it awful, others found it good, but it seemed to be a catalyst for what do I want to do? What am I
yeah.
doing with my life? You know?
Or what do you not want to be doing?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Either or. I mean, I talked about that, the energy. So you know, going back to the art of presence, I'm talking about being present. But really, that's the foundation. And I've been, you know, I've been recently listening to this guy called Dr. Robert Gilbert, who specializes. I sent Gary the video in Rosicrucian stuff, and I found it fascinating because it ties back to a lot of Hermetic stuff that I was learning years ago. And he was talking about the foundations, and really, there's like the first thing is observing oneself and starting to understand what is us and what is the mind or what we're projecting. So that's the first point. So being present, you've got to do it. It's the foundation to any spiritual practice. And then once you've learned to quieten that mind and find that stillness, then it gets exciting because then you become active. Then you can choose what you put into the mind and allow to come out, which is thought forms.
Well, it's the whole thing of conscious action as well at that point,
Yes.
Steve.
Yeah. Yeah. Amazing. You know, so presence is just, it encompasses all, but really it's the foundation and learning who you are. And like you said, we're not who we think we are. And that's a shock to everyone because, you know, the way I always see it is the personality. So I have an accent. I was brought up in the place that I was brought up in. I have preferences. I do this. This is the personality and the way I behave, my humor, all these. I'm not diminishing that. People think that you're going to lose this thing, which is an ego personality. But what we're trying to do is use that as the vehicle to it. You know, I always think the ego is just there so we can communicate in this realm, this 3D realm. But ultimately, underneath it, we're not 3D. So I'm not talking about don't be yourself anymore. You become more. We're adding depth to it. We can see what actions we're actually in control of and what we're not. So hopefully in the art of presence, that's what I'm getting them to feel. I'm not talking about, you know, I always make this, it's a little bit of a joke. I always, you know, do this. It's not all namaste. It isn't love and light and namaste, you know. And I'll tell you one thing I did notice, which was really interesting. When I do the talks over my main talks, what I organize, it's more, I think people are from more spiritual backgrounds. They're looking, you know, I'm getting all sorts. I swear at them ones a lot more than I did at the ones with when there was all the bloke swear, because I think I used the swearing to sort of point
Yeah,
out,
drive home things. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
and to point out that spiritual life does not mean you can't swear and do these things. Whereas at the one where everyone was swearing, I hardly swore because
Yeah.
it wouldn't matter to them. That's not going to bring them in. It wouldn't. They would probably notice that I didn't swear because they swear all the time. So that was an interesting to note on myself that I was like, oh yeah, I use swearing when people think I shouldn't, and where a place where it's appropriate, I didn't. You know.
Well, I mean, the truth is that the messenger finds the right voice for the moment. So that feels
Mm.
very right to me.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
There was
And I
something
don't mean
you
just
mentioned,
a
Steve,
messenger.
just before we came on, to do with why you think some of these changes are happening. Obviously, we mentioned COVID here, that of a catalyst, and I think in hindsight, that will be the case for a lot of people. But this thing of being squeezed, and you know, how do you feel about that? That sort of, if you want to call it suffering, but that does create growth.
I mean, interesting. I had a conversation with a young guy after my talk, and he quickly said, can I have a private word with you?" And I talked about masculine and feminine. I thought, is he going to ask me something about that, whatever? But he was genuinely, let's say, worried. There was some element of fear there of this timeline split and people talking about, you know, different energies going on, you know, and he was viewing it through the mind, which is, you know, I won't go into any, but you know, when people look at, so I answered him that I can't tell you, and even if I knew, if I explained to you, you'd walk away and within 5 minutes you'd get a contradictory explanation, and you'd go with that, and then you're back to the point of view, who's right, who's wrong. I have my own opinions based on other people's teachings, old things like yourself. I do think within time periods of humanity, we know about golden ages and there's the Kali Yuga. It does appear that there's an energy going on at the moment, which, you know, you could look at COVID and all the nonsense that's gone in as a bad thing. No, it isn't, because it's being revealed to us. And I always say in my talks, again, how can I say this? I'm only going on my own experience, my own feeling, that there's an energy going on at the moment, and it's neutral in the respect of, if you want to ascend, it will assist you like never before, because there's a new energy pushing you up. But if you want to descend and go more into unconsciousness, it goes, I'll help you do that. So the split I see going is not necessarily, you know, if anyone talks about, they may know, they may have channels saying they've got information. I can't, you know, I just go inwards. And I always, like I said at the last talk, I'm excited by anything that comes up because it will show me who I am in that moment when it arises, and that excites me. So all I can ever do is be present when it happens and as clear, non-reactive, so that I know I'm doing my best in whatever comes. So if there is a timeline, Couldn't tell you, but I know there's an energy going on at the moment, just from my own experience of people who are working on things. What it took 10 years is taking a year. What took, it does. It seems that someone, once they engage in some spiritual practice, they're getting helped. If they want to drink more and take more drugs and have sex and just, go downward, it helps them do that. It's like check in or check out. I don't mind. So I don't know if that's to do with the Kali Yuga, where we are in the cycles of the great year. I couldn't tell you, but I'm noticing it in my daily life. Like an example, that talk of all them blokes that are now deciding to engage in less, people call it spiritual life. I always say there is no separation between your spiritual life and your normal life. You are a spiritual being living. So every action you have is a spiritual action. There isn't, we don't think there is, but that is us. We are living every moment as a spiritual being. So they're starting to look at that, which is amazing.
Yeah, I suppose you could say, that is our natural state, which has been slightly skewed now. We just don't.
It's our only state. With every thought we have, every action we do, take yourself seriously. And I don't mean that not to have fun, but if we knew what our minds were doing, like I started that talk, and I think just to get him in there a bit, I said, you've got 8 billion people on this planet. And imagine how many negative thoughts. So if you think your negative thoughts aren't having an impact, combine that with the 8 billion people, and you want to know why the world is such a chaotic place at the moment. These negative thoughts are going out there and manifesting all sorts of trouble. So if you want to change the world, like I always say, you start learning to control you. And that is it. And I sound boring because I'm always going on about it, but it excites the hell out of me because the potential for that is unbelievable. Mm.
Right. Run out of time again. That's a good point to finish. And I do think people miss how powerful that is. That internal work has a massive effect on the collective. It's kind of all we can do when people say, well, what can I do? I'm just one person. It's like, no, it's massive. So
when it is massive, but that doesn't mean like we've talked about, non-active. You could be super active, but where are you coming from? Are you coming from here or here? So when you're coming from here, your energy levels increase, and you can do whatever you like. You're free. You're not acting out of fear anymore. You're not acting from the mind of telling you that I'm useless, I need to do something to change. You're coming from here, and you know that everything you do, every interaction that you have in the shop, the supermarket, how you conduct yourself, living the example rather than, talking all the time, that changes everything. Honestly, it does. So I'm super excited. I mean, I know we've only got a short time left, but if anyone wants to get in touch with me, metaphysicalcowboy.com, because, I'm talking about this as a grand thing. People then want to know how you do it. And really, I can't really say how you do it. I can just encourage you to feel it and find it, and then you go off on your own little thing. And I'd be excited to see how you do.
Brilliant. Right. Well, hopefully you'll join us again, Stephen. It's been great having you again.
Thank you for having me. And Casper, thank you always. And Gary, thank you. And it's brilliant. Keep up what you're doing.
It's a pleasure, mate. And the more you do of this, the work on yourself and the work with others, the ripple effects of that are already incredible. So I just urge you to keep going, mate. And thank you again for your time.
I can feel it. I actually genuinely feel it, and it's exciting. And I hope everyone watching can feel it as well. Brilliant. Take care, you two, and I'll speak to you soon. Have a lovely day.
Mate. Lovely to see you.